So there's an anecdote that a friend of mine has at where I went to college, that one of the professors has a anti-technology aura around him, that wherever he goes, something around him breaks. And apparently one time he was, they had a random failure there. Like one of the systems went down completely, and to the point that they had to just reinstall it from scratch. And they find out later he was passing by in a train at that exact time. So I'm starting to think that I have somehow picked up that ability. So this is an organic presentation based on stuff I've fiddled with in the last, I don't know, 3 or 4 months for a tool we've built. My name is Shawn Thomas. I work for a company named Peak 6. And as you've already learned, I am the master of disaster, unfortunately for you and me. And I'm going to apologize in advance because this slideshow, like all of my presentations, is filled with a copious amount of horrible puns. And no one should be subjected to that, but that's just the way it is, and you're just gonna have to live with it. So, who is this guy? Who am I? I'm not Robert Haas. I'm not Greg Smith. I'm none of the famous people that actually matter. But I've been around. I've done a couple of things. And no, I don't actually run the Planet Postgres site. That's just where the Postgres articles I write on Friday get syndicated. I do recommend that you actually put that on your RSS reader or whatever it is if you don't already have it. Very handy to have around. Lots of good stuff on there. And actually, I just read yesterday or the day before a new Cassandra foreign data wrapper is kind of out that gives Postgres the ability to kind of grow, even though it's not really Postgres doing the heavy lifting. So before I get any further, an LFAs, the HAAS part is not Robert Haas. So I know that you all love Robert Haas, but it has nothing to do with him. It's just a coincidence. The X as a service model, being the trendy thing to do nowadays, the letter H was just how that happened to work there. Because I picked the word herd, elephant herd, as a service. Maybe I should have called it phase and just made it shorter and more pronounceable. But in the wonderful background of the PostgreSQL family, I wanted to make sure that nobody could pronounce the name of the actual product. So we had a problem, and it's a problem that I'm not sure a lot of people have, but it's one that I had never encountered before, because usually I work with larger instances, ones that are like, hundreds of gigabytes, terabytes in size, and handle, hundreds of thousands of transactions a second, and billions of transactions a day. No, this is a different thing entirely. So my company, the division I was working for, got sold out, and I got transferred to another division. And the new one had been accumulating Postgres instances like they were candy for years. And I stumbled into this, and I didn't quite know what to do with it, because I saw over 100 Postgres instances all over the place. And it was a rat's nest of various kinds of replication setups and virtual instances and just a lot of craziness. And yeah, it just kept on going. Hundreds of instances, lots of clusters in 5 data centers. And then our operating environments were dev, QA, user acceptance testing, and prod. So each one of those is a separate kind of related install to all the other ones. And then out of all that is about 60 terabytes of Postgres data. The largest one of which is 50 all by itself. It's a little on the hefty side. And, might as well add that in there for fun. So where is the actual solution for this? The closest thing I could come up with was Rep Manager, which is handy for managing single herds of replication. So you've got like one master, maybe a failover, and then lots of replicas. You can manage one of those, maybe a couple of those, maybe even a dozen of them before it starts to get kind of unwieldy, because then you need a management service for your management service. So what is there? And unfortunately, I don't know if it's because no one actually had this problem before, or never really stopped to build something, or they just moved to Amazon once they got to this point, because Jesus, why build all this yourself? But we had that problem and had nothing. So what is Postgres? That's our mascot, right? Big old hefty elephant. I'm going to be making an analogy here where Postgres, that elephant guy, is one instance. That's one guy. All right. This is a herd. That's one Postgres instance primary with however many standard replicas you've got following it around. And the reason I'm making up this terminology is because I kind of want to make it relatable to Postgres and unique to Postgres. Although I suppose that you could abstract this to other database engines without too much trouble. And this is my solution here. LFAs does this. It manages clusters of herds. That thing in the middle is kind of the central nexus piece of software that actually handles turning on and off the herds, resynchronizing all the different herds, checking the synchronization, doing the disaster recovery failovers. It's the magic glue. So what does it do? It lets you kind of slice, dice, fricassee, julienne, all the different herds and structures, and actually decide what you want to see and what kind of operations you want to do on them. The basic stuff, you can start, stop, reload, rebuild, synchronize, promote, whatever. Things you would expect to be able to do with a Postgres instance or anything related to one. The thing that I added on as kind of a proof of concept, though, was in a company like ours, we need to do disaster recovery failovers. So we've got two pairs, and we've got one that's live, one that's not. And aside from Pacemaker, which is a huge, heavy-duty automated system that you've got to spend like a day configuring, we wanted something just like you press a button and boom, you're failed over. So that's what this does also. There's a menu specifically for this with a view that lets you see all your disaster recovery pairs. And the cool thing the view does is it actually, like, out of all your replicas, it will rank them and show only the top one that's the least bit behind as far as the recovery lag. And then it will promote that one. And in the herd menu, you can actually say, like, this herd has this DNS CNAME, and it will move all that automatically. So the reason I put that in here was because from my herd menu on the disaster recovery system, I can highlight a radio box, a checkbox. It'll do the whole column. I can click go, and it will do our entire disaster recovery failover in 5 minutes for over 100 instances. So that's the kind of automation that I'm talking about here. Like I'm not just saying you put something in an SSH loop and then do PDSH or something and parallel SSH commands or looping or any kind of crazy thing like that. This is just a GUI for doing all those really dangerous things you don't really want to do, but you've got to have something for it. There's my checkboxes. And then the other thing is Django kind of gives you this little ability to have confirmation to make sure that you're not shooting yourself in the face. I kept that enabled on purpose for intermediate pages, make sure I don't break anything. So what actually goes into this? Well, there's Postgres for obvious reasons. I do recommend making sure you have that installed. This is a Django app. I know people like various other toolkits. I mean, there's Flask and there's those other less heavy-duty ones. This one specifically I chose because of the admin functionality, which I'll get to later. And SSH keys. That's it. That's all you need. So if you can set up SSH between your machines so they can talk to each other transparently, then that's all you need to get LFAs to work. Oh yeah, I forgot. rsync, because you've got to be able to rebuild your replicas. Why not something like PG base backup? Well, PG base backup is not ideal when you have anything over, say, 100 gigs, because it has to rebuild everything from scratch, and there's no way for it to bootstrap based on what's already there. So maybe that'll be like a plugin option for later. So like if a small instance, it'll use that instead. Make sure it's a fresh snapshot. So why Django? You see all that code? Looks like a lot of code, but that's my environment model. I've got like 6 models. I got herds, environments, instances, servers, just standard database design. And so we've got this basic model. Looks like a lot of code, but what all that gets you is all this stuff. So you get your environment. You get basically an ORM to control the records in your environment. I can do, like I said, the fricasseeing and Julianing of all the different options for doing the searches for environments. I can override all the names. And I kind of want to point out that you'll notice my DB name there. I changed that because Django's naming scheme is kind of garbage. So as a DBA, I kind of wanted to override that. But it lets you, so that's all right. So all that stuff for, maybe, what was that, 20 lines of code at most? But this is the real kicker. So I don't want to spend, my day as a DBA writing a bunch of template code and, Ajax stuff and, whatever else it takes to make a good quote-unquote front end. So I cheated. Django has a nifty little tool they call their little admin extension. And if you activate it and you do that binding where you basically glue your classes together. So I took I made an environment admin class and I glued it to the environment class. And then once I did the instantiation on the register, that register line, I now get a lot of magic. And I love magic because I'm not a coder. Like I started out as a coder like 20 years ago, but those skills kind of have faded a bit. Like I said, I'm not Robert Haas, I'm not Greg Smith, I'm not any of those guys that actually write C in the back end and are like, yeah, I'm Mr. Coder guy. That's not me. So let me zoom in. Oh, actually, I can't zoom in on that, but we'll have a demo later anyway. So if you can see that, those are the environments I added. It lets you, like I said, you can view them and get various options. You could add new ones and delete old ones or make changes, whatever. All those options, all those menus came from those 3 lines of code. That's the real magic here with Django. So everything that goes into this, all the prerequisites that I've already mentioned, like I said, you need rsync and Django and SSH keys and Postgres. But for Django itself, you need a little bit more, but those are pretty easy to install. So you need Django. That's pretty simple. PsychoPG2 is like the Postgres driver, so that's pretty obvious. Paramiko is something I kind of ran across. It's very handy for running SSH commands remotely. And that's why the SSH keys are there, because how this works is LFAs runs as a central service on a server you choose. And it transmits out SSH commands to all of the systems you're managing. And then DNS Python for that DNS bit I was mentioning earlier, so you can do those automated failovers with DNS changes. And for those who have corporate environments, in the sample configuration file, I added a bunch of, it really is one of the longest bits of code, like 30 lines of code for doing LDAP auth. So you can log in with LDAP for like the rest of your organization instead of having like a separate login for the Django app. And it does all the authentication grouping that way. So I'm in the infrastructure org as a DBA admin. I made that like the default group for anyone who logs in for it to check for. So if you're in the DBA group, in the infrastructure group, and you log into the service, you automatically get to do all the stuff in the admin tool. So I kind of cheated. I probably should have actually put in actual ACLs and then bound those to groups that are derived from the LDAP stuff, but maybe that'll be in a future version. I'm just one guy after all. Basic installation is what you would expect. The requirements, like I said, are Django, PsychoPG, Paramiko, and DNS Python. Some people like to do all their stuff, all their management with the Python kind of infrastructure, all the built-in libraries and tools for managing Python stuff, and in which case, you'd want to use pip. But if you're using like a RHEL system, Debian, Ubuntu, CentOS, those are 99.9% going to be packages that are already available to you. So install them whichever way you wish. I personally, on our Ubuntu systems at work, have installed them. They're like Python dash and then whatever name is listed there. Unless there's some kind of version necessary, and I don't think I needed any specific version, so this should all work just based on whatever you see. You get the engine from the tarball that I installed, or that I put on GitHub, because GitHub's where everyone goes, right? You untar it, and you modify a config file. Like I said, the config file, that local settings.py, there's actually another configuration file called settings.py, which contains the structural configuration for the app itself. Generally, I don't recommend going in there because that actually tells it which modules to load, like all the different stuff that actually will modify how the app actually functions. This is just for configuring it how to activate on the local installation. So here's the weird thing with most Django apps is you've got to kind of create the schemas and get them bootstrapped. They keep changing this. I don't know if it happened 1 or 2 versions ago, but it's instead of like SQL initiate or whatever, it's now migrate. I'm not sure quite how that relates. And then in the default that I've built with this, the default schema is utility, and it looks for in the default admin, like if you just, in the instructions, if you just move that file over, you'll need to do this exactly as written. Because it looks for the tables in the utility schema, and it looks for them in the admin database. But obviously, you can change those. And then if you're not using LDAP, you create a super user, and you're done. All you got to do is start it up, and you're running. I didn't realize this, but if you notice there in my example, I use a DSA type for my SSH keys. Don't do that. Apparently, DSA is horribly broken now, and I'm not sure when this was the case, but use RSA instead, which is the default. But other than that, all you've really got to do is create your SSH key and then blast it across all your servers. And it should be symmetric, because the rsync commands do invoke from these replica systems. That's why, and I've got this listed here to make sure that it's very obvious. Use configuration management. Okay, I don't care if it's Chef or Puppet or bconfig or CF Engine, whatever. Just use something to automate your SSH key broadcasts and make sure that all your systems that are managed by whatever tool you choose get configured with some central structure. Otherwise, what you end up having is you have to log into each system, manually configure them all. And like I said, when you've got over 100 of these, nobody wants to do that. It could be 100, it could be 1,000, it could be 5,000, and it's the same result. You want to automate as much as possible. And because of that, I actually put this in the menu. So if you add a new server to the list of servers it manages, it's like, okay, now that you know this, put this SSH key there. Just while you're adding the server, go ahead and log into it and add the key, just in case you're not automated. Obviously, the key there I have is fake because it says, what do I actually have it say? This is not a real key. Don't use this because it won't do anything. Why are you still reading this, you crazy? And then it just keeps on going. And that's actually one of the settings in the config I was mentioning, the local config, local settings.py. It's a setting called public_key, and you'll want to set that so that it knows to put it in this menu. That's really all it does. It just displays it. It doesn't actually broadcast it because it can't. That would take an SSH key. So I do have a short demo, very short demo. Where's this guy? Oh, it's in the tab. All right. So let me zoom in a little bit. Oop, too much. All right, so this is the actual main menu that you get for free. Like, I just made a few bits of code, and then it just generated all this for me. The only stuff I had to do was make a few modifications to the base templates to get them to be a little more functional than they were by default, because these little help menu things here, these were not included. They just have like the add and change, and then you can also delete, I think is the default, but I turned that off. So if I do this, like what is a herd, it tells you what a herd is. Like if I want to know what a instance is, it tells me what an instance is, and then where it actually matters. And like in a disaster recovery pair, it tells you what the disaster recovery pair is and what happens if you do a failover. Like it actually explains like what some of the commands you can actually run from those menus, and what they do. So it's not just hope you know what you're doing. Good luck. So I've got in this particular system, I've got this particular setup. I made so my admin database is on there. It doesn't have to be. I mean, you can't really, if you shut it off, the system doesn't work anymore. But I have one herd with one primary and two replicas. And this is why I was kind of mentioning the extended functionality that I really love. I can just suddenly do this, and I say I want to let's rebuild the replicas. Now notice that I included the primary, because that primary at the very bottom, I included that. Now, I don't recommend doing this, but this is why we have confirmation pages. Notice that primary is gone. It ripped it out, because it's like, you can't rebuild that, you silly person. But it does. Like this is a template that I modified, because normally it looks a lot different. And it actually will tell me like which container, which herd source you're actually modifying. And I'm gonna be like, yeah, go ahead, rebuild these. Erase them. I hate the data that's on there and they're out of sync or whatever, I don't care. So that's gonna run for a second. Now here's a spot where I could maybe do some improvements. Like maybe I can make it more Ajax-y and actually fork out some kind of JavaScript call, and then have this page go back to the listing and then update that as the rebuilds occur. Because if you've got like 500 gig replicas, it's going to sit there and wait for each one of those to rebuild before returning you to the next page. And as you can see, VMs are slow. And even though these have basically no data on them, it's not as quite as instantaneous as you might want. But then you get your ERS feedback. I again did not do any of this. It just does that for you. Like all I did was change what kind of output that is actually displayed. And then my disaster recovery pairs again. This is that view I was talking about. Notice how there's no edit menus or anything else, because it's based on a view. Like you can only see what's going on in disaster recovery pairs. But what I can do, at least for now, until I add more functionality, is I can be like, oh, I want to perform a failover. Go. Yes, please. And all that really does is that stops the primary, promotes the secondary that was the candidate in the list, and then returns you to the main screen that you just saw. And then if you really want to, you can re-add the old primary as a new replica, and then you can rebuild it. But it stops it instead of actually including it, because that might actually, like there may be some kind of diagnostics you want to run on the primary after you fail it over. So now we have the one on dev 2 is the primary, and it also connects to all of the downstream replicas and tells them to follow the new primary also. So it kind of does all the magic stuff you would expect it to do. It changes all their replication targets and all that. And then the primary, you can do whatever you want to later. It gets marked as a replica of the new primary. So I could just start that up and then rebuild it. PG Rewind is not built in here, but it should be. So maybe if we have time, in the next couple months, we can add that in there instead, so that the primary, once it fails over, is ready to be rewound and integrated directly instead of having to be resynced. But like I said, this is the first iteration. The other thing is, I think for the demo, that's all I really needed. Yeah, I like this fake production thing I'm going to delete, because I don't really need production on my dev systems. Yes, please. All right. I'm going to go ahead and stop these, because why not? Come on. Oh, all right. But anyway, that's the actual interface that's all here. Like I said, it's not much of a crazy, amazing, powerful tool. It's just a first iteration. If anyone has some Python skills and wants to contribute, come talk to me later. We do encourage pull requests. And yes, that is all it does. And I apologize. It's a good start. So future plans. Right now, it only works with existing systems. Like if you've got an existing constellation of servers, you can manage them as they are. But I would like to have it do stuff like being able to bootstrap new replicas, or start with a brand new primary and then start creating replicas of that. Because, why not? PG backrest would be a great thing to build into it, because we've got this menu that's handily showing you everything that's available. So you can see all the backups of all your primary instances and then decide which one to invoke. You can even put it in another container and tell it to become a new herd. So there's a lot of potential functionality in here. And like I said, ACLs, because right now, if you have access as admin, you can do anything that it can do. Like there's no way to control who has access to what. Like the admin itself is very handy, because if I go here to this home screen, like it actually tells you, it has like a log of everything that ever happened, but that's more of a auditing kind of thing. You can't stop it from occurring. So really only people in my infrastructure department have access to this. And even then, I'm like, please come see me before you do anything, because it's really a powerful tool, unfortunately, and also fortunately. So here's the other piece of magic that I also included. So I made another extension called EELE Tools, which is a Python library that you install and then maybe invoke through cron, or invoke from the command line, or put it in your configuration management or whatever. And because we use Debian systems, I wrote it initially for the Debian systems to use. There's a command called pgls clusters that tells you all the names of the Postgres systems running on your current instance or server. Like if you run on a server and there's 10 instances on there, it'll show you all of them. There's not a lot of easy ways to auto-discover Postgres instances on a machine, unfortunately. I mean, I guess I could go to var run Postgres, or like look in temp and look for which sockets are currently used by Postgres systems, but there's really no way to auto-discover unless you look for the basic locations and then hope that's what people are putting stuff. But back in the day when I wrote, when I had initial Postgres systems, I would just put it in var and like /data/Postgres and then put it there. All the config files are also there local in the PG data directory. I would have no way of finding that if I was just like an automated system looking around for it, right? So unfortunately, this only really works for Debian-based, Ubuntu kind of Mint systems. And what this does is it actually will talk to an LFA server and transmit the current state of the server and all of instances on it to that system. So one of the things you get is, you probably noticed that that lag in the instance menu for my Megabyte Lag from the primary. It actually will look for the number of transactions behind the replicas are from the master and calculate how many megabytes they are behind them in the replication stream. And it keeps that up to date all the time. Basically, I've got this in cron. It runs every minute, and it keeps all those updated. And it's push-based because when I've got 10,000 servers, I don't want my LFA server sitting there in a loop constantly pulling all the machines, right? That would take forever, and who knows how long it would take. So all the different servers are kind of ad hoc, asynchronously contacting the home base and saying, OK, this is my current status. So if I started one of these on the actual VM and then reloaded this 5 minutes later, it would just be running. I wouldn't have to change anything on here. But that's what that tool is for. It's a separate tool because it's not really required by LFAs to run, but it's kind of handy to have around. And it also runs on the all the instances instead of the actual primary main server, so it's not really part of the same package. I've got links for all this stuff in here in case you want more. I just realized now that I went through that way faster than I had intended. So if there's questions or comments or banana peels you want to throw, that's the time to do it. Would be right now. Gabby?
Have you had a horrible accident with that yet?
Actually, no. And here's the cool thing. During our company's disaster recovery test, we do this every November, I think. So I've had this in internal beta for a while. The last time we used it for an actual migration, we had our disaster recovery test. And in that disaster recovery menu, like I'd mentioned, it shows you all the pairs. Of course, it probably won't work now because they're down. And it doesn't show ones that are down. I don't think so. Yeah, it doesn't show the ones that are down. That's probably something I should fix. But we have, I want to say, 12 primary herds that actually have a disaster recovery failover target. So all I did, like I did before in that example I showed, I just highlighted all the checkboxes and I clicked go. And then it moved all the DNS, it moved all the targets, and suddenly we were failed over. And normally I would have had to log into each one of those and been like, blah, 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 promote, blah, 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 promote, and then actually shut down the primary. And then I would tell them by email, OK, we're ready. Start all your apps and make sure they're pointing to the DNS instead of the actual machine name. But none of that anymore. And then while I was waiting for them to do their tests, I went to the instance menu and I highlighted all the old primaries. And I said, rebuild following new primary. And suddenly, those are all replicas. And then I just do another DR failover, and I'm done. So all it was automated. All was from menus. It was all just clicking buttons. I mean, I feel like a horrible Windows admin when I say stuff like that. But sometimes GUI is the way to go. And like I said, this really only applies if you have a need for managing just ridiculous amounts of Postgres instances. And that's a very niche need, but apparently I work on all niche needs. My book is for high availability Postgres, and it highlights using a pacemaker, which is who uses pacemaker in Postgres in a system that needs to be up 24/7 and handles 1 billion transactions a second? Very few people. And yet, they had me write a book on it. So, yeah, I'm like the king of niche systems, as well as the master of disaster for breaking things. And I guess the two kind of go well together, because if I'm around and things are breaking, I want to make sure that they can keep running anyway, right? So, yeah. Service discovery options. I would love if you have them available. Like I said, my idea was to look in var run Postgres for ports that are in use, or maybe /temp instead. But there's other locations that I wanted to build in the next iteration of EELE Tools for the service discovery. But I feel that there's other ways to do it also. Maybe because I know Red Hat has its own system that's not PGLS cluster. It's some other thing, and I could probably hack into that too if it's available. Have it discover which ones are available and then use them if they're there. So if anyone has suggestions, I will gladly take them, because I want to make sure that tool is as complete as possible, because the discovery it's not the biggest part of the magic with LFAs, but it's one of the most completing. It makes the tool a whole object that actually can be used to manage a system, because you can install EELE tools on all of your servers, put LFAs on your admin server, and make sure you use configuration management to send out the config so all the servers are connecting to the correct central system. Then the cluster organically appears in the admin tool, and you don't have to do anything. That's kind of like the essential magic of this. Like if we spin up a couple of VMs and I give them the Postgres profile in our configuration management, they just show up in this tool. I don't have to do anything. Like if my dev, one of my devs, on their own server decides to add a Postgres instance because they're testing something, that shows up in my admin tool. So it's a very clean way of keeping track of all just random Postgres environments that just happen to pop up in a system that's very active. So there's lots of different ways you could kind of use this. And yeah, a better this auto discovery system would be nice. So if there's,
I'm talking to you afterwards.
I will. Anyone else? Bueller? All right, I guess that's it.